There are a number of issues that we have to address when we're establishing a class. These cover the rules and routines for the smooth running of the class, expectations about the way we relate to one another, and whether the children are 5 or 15 or even older, they hinge around 3 crucial understandings. The right to feel safe in the classroom, not just physically safe, but psychologically and emotionally safe, which is why schools need to be vigilant and supportive with any issues of teasing or bullying. The right to basic respect and fair treatment by the teacher to students and students to each other. And obviously the right to learn without undue distraction or disruption. As you can see in this drawing here, this is an infant class or early years class, and I'm sitting down with a colleague and we're asking the children 3 basic questions. How do we feel safe here? And what that means. How do we learn well here? And what does that mean and what does it imply? And what is respect and how do we show respect and even manners towards one another? We never assume manners, even with older children. For example, in an infant class, one of the things we would do by the end of week 1 is have an agreement in place with the children, even very young children, about how we feel safe, how we learn and how we show respect. And often this involves a teacher using photographs to illustrate children in these relationships and behaviours for learning and the way they relate to one another. And a copy of that goes home to every parent or caregiver by the end of the 2nd week as a link between home and school about expectations about learning and behaviour. For example, at upper primary and secondary, we start with the key right and then we talk about the responsibilities that go with that right. For example, the right to learn, the expectations that go with that is that we'll get to class on time. If we're late, we have a considerate entry to the class. We knock, wait for the teacher to call us in and so forth. When we come into the class, we settle, we relax in our seating arrangements, which the teacher has talked about with the class, and that's crucial too, to have appropriate age-related seating arrangements. During class discussions, when we're sharing or asking questions or contributing or giving opinions, a convention about hands up, one at a time, take your turn. Then that poster also includes that when we finished our whole class teaching time and we move into on-task learning time, we talk about the importance of appropriate voices for an inside space. And the term we use at middle and upper primary onwards is partner voice or inside voice or working voices. At upper primary and secondary, we talk about the importance of leaving the room tidy once we've finished our time together in the room. And that is also noted on that poster. The other poster we have is about respect, the crucial understanding of the right to respect, but the responsibilities that go with the enjoyment of that right, that we all share the same place and space and reason for being here. We use considered language, no put-downs, cheap shots, scoring or shafting, and bullying of any kind is totally unacceptable and will always be firmly addressed to the perpetrator, and the victim will always be supported to work that through with their teacher and the perpetrator wherever necessary. So those 2 posters, if you like, highlight an understanding of the behaviour expectations between the teacher and the student. And again, they're published on posters in every single classroom to get a whole school sense of reasonable and fair expectations with young people. In this example here, as you can see on the screen, you can see Michelle, my colleague, standing there, and the children are about to come into class. Now, I was team teaching or mentor coaching with Michelle, and several boys down the back were pushing, shoving, grabbing, doing a bit of low-grade kind of rear-end crown jewel work with their knees. Silly, male testosteronic nonsense. But what bothered me was that Michelle hadn't addressed that. And I didn't want the class coming in with this behaviour unaddressed, so I just briefly said to Michelle, do you mind if I have a quick word to the boys down the back? They were very noisy as well. And she said, no, that's fine, Bill. So I just said to the class, excuse me for a moment, everyone. So we cue the whole group that's lining up, because they've got to put up with this nonsense at the back. So we cue them first. Excuse me for a moment, everyone. Boys, and I just turned my gaze to the boys, and they'd stopped at this point, probably because they'd heard a different voice. I said, boys, you're pushing, shoving, grabbing. A brief descriptive cue to raise that behaviour awareness upstairs. I said, boys, you're pushing, shoving and grabbing. And before I could finish, one of the boys said, we're just mucking around. I said, fellas, we don't muck around like that in our class. We're ready to go into class. As I took my eyes off these boys to convey the expectation that they'd understood this, to refocus back to the children who were waiting to come in, I briefly thanked them. Thank you. We're ready to go into class now. And I could see as they came in, these 4 or 5 boys were still scowling and sulking because I'd addressed their behaviour. But it's important to remember that even when we have that transition between playtime or out of class time and coming into a classroom, that too is a core routine, an essential core routine. When we got in the class, as you can see here in the picture, several students had their backs to Michelle while she was introducing me as the second teacher in the room. And it bothered me that this was allowed to happen. So when the class was handed over, in a sense, as the second teacher, I chose to re-establish what the expectation is when we're together during whole class teaching time. So even before a good morning, I said something like this: a number of you got your backs to me, just to raise their behaviour awareness upstairs, as it were. A number of you got your backs to me. Even before I'd finished that, several students started to turn their chairs around. I thanked them. Thank you, yep. Yeah, bring your chairs right in, thanks. A couple more over here. Yeah, bring your chair right in. That's much better, thank you. Some of you are still fiddling with toys. I said that's very distracting. The toys need to be in your pencil case, or if you like, you can leave them on your teacher's table till playtime. Some of you are still calling out, and some kids were calling out, clicking their fingers, wanting to know why the new teacher was there. I said, I will take your questions later. Right now, you need to put your hands down and be facing this way and listening. So it sounds like a lot when I'm trying to unpack that, but I'm trying to cue the expectation for whole class settling, that we sit with our chairs in, relaxed, facing the front, not with their backs to the teachers, so we have to talk over their backs, because as you can see in the drawing, there are table groups. And then when they're settled, and only when they're settled, which normally takes 2 or 3 minutes in very challenging classes, we then thank them. Thank you, you're much more relaxed now. Good morning, everyone. My name's Mr. Rogers and I'm working with your regular teacher, and so on. To then strengthen the expectation of those behaviours, Michelle and I came up with 2 posters. The first one describes how we come into the class after playtime. And it begins with remember rather than don't forget, because again, remember is more directional to the expectation that we're trying to convey. Before we come into class, we remember that playtime is over. We have a calm, considered and relaxed entry. We make sure that we put our chewing gum on the bin, hats off, water bottles on the table, and then we come onto the mat for whole class teaching time. So all those understandings we put on a poster so that they could see that poster as they came into the classroom. And that poster was generated through a classroom discussion as, if you like, a new re-established expectation in that class. We then had a second poster, and this is done in many, many schools, that talks about going to play. So the next transition is between leaving our classroom learning community and going to the playground. So before we go to play, we remember that the playground is a place where we share together in our play and recreational activities. So the core routines are essential to establish right from the outset. Noise level, for example, movement around the room, how to get teacher assistance during on-task learning time, When we're establishing a new class, we never assume any of those understands. We discuss them with the children, and having discussed them, we sometimes find it helpful to represent those in meaningful posters as visual cues. And then our behaviour leadership extends and reinforces that and encourages that on a day-to-day basis.